This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The resignation of Abdallah Hamdok as Sudan's Prime Minister is welcomed by some, but raises fears of political uncertainty. Health authorities believe South Africa's COVID infections have passed the peak of the fourth wave. And we explore a rare adventure on the African continent that's drawing tourists to Lesotho. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya's economy grows nearly 10% in the third quarter following the easing of COVID restrictions. And South Africa's president set to receive the first part of a much-anticipated report into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud. Of course, all that coming up within the program for now.
Thanks very much, Uche. Well, we start in Sudan, where the resignation of the country's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has thrown the country into further political uncertainty. Some reports indicate the military has identified a potential candidate for the Prime Minister's office. Musab Ibrahim has more from Khartoum.
We know after what's happened yesterday, after the Prime Minister was being resigned, there is suggesting about two persons. The first one is the former Finance Minister, and he's belonged to the Al-Ummah party. And there is another one, his name is Professor Mudawi, is also being suggested for the new Prime Minister. But there's no indicate now, and there's no declaration about which one is going to be chosen. Yes, it was received by the Sudanese. The citizen was good, they accepted, and they believe like he's supposed to do this before 4 weeks or 6 weeks, because all of them, they're refusing what's the deal between him and the general commander in the 21st of November. And now the process is not indicated right now because they need a new man, a new prime minister that could be acceptable by the three partners, the military and the FFC and the street is the important part. The resign for the prime minister is making no change. So the people, they went in the street, they're asking for the civil government. They don't care about the prime ministers. So they like the prime minister and they feel pleasant when he stepped down. But the people are still going and resting. And the people from from FFC, they asking that they're going to take them to a protest and escalation in the street for all these months. And they promise there is a new protest after tomorrow, and this continue every 2 or 3 days until they have the civil government.
Well, citizens of Sudan have registered mixed reactions following the resignation of the country's Prime Minister. Some have lamented the resignation of Abdallah Hamdok, while others say they will continue to fight for political change against military rule. Hamdok resigned as Prime Minister on Sunday, saying he had been unable to unite polarized factions towards a transition. His resignation takes place just 6 weeks after he was reinstated to his post following a military takeover in October. Hamdok's resignation deepens uncertainty around Sudan's political future and also puts in jeopardy the transition towards elections since the 2019 downfall of Omar al-Bashir.
To be honest, the Sudanese people did not want Hamdok to resign, but the military council pressured him into doing so. I wish him well and I hope someone better will come along. These people, we do not want them. The Sudanese people do not want them, and hopefully, the time too will soon come.
When it comes to our needs on the ground, his staying or leaving doesn't make a difference. Our issue is now bigger than him, and our battle is greater. So whether he stays or goes, it doesn't really make a difference to us.
Even after the October 25th coup, we signed a framework with the military in an attempt to get back on track towards the democratic transition, to put an end to the bloodshed, for the release of prisoners, and to safeguard what had been achieved through the past 2 years, and to adhere to the constitutional declaration that governed the transition. This agreement was just another attempt at uniting all sides at the negotiating table and to agree on a document by which the rest of the transitional period could be completed. Based on everything I have mentioned, I decided to give back the responsibility and announce my resignation as Prime Minister to give a chance to another man or woman of this noble country to continue leading our dear nation and help it pass through what's left of the transitional period to a civilian democratic country.
Well, let's take a closer look into who Abdallah Hamdok is and what his priorities have been as Prime Minister. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila.
Born in 1956 in South Kordofan State, Abdallah Hamdok studied economics at universities in Khartoum and Manchester. Over the course of his career, Hamdok worked for the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the African Development Bank, and the Trade and Development Bank in Ethiopia. Upon taking office as Prime Minister, he focused his attention on the economic crisis and uniting the country. To address the public debt burden, the Prime Minister began talks with the IMF and World Bank, getting relief on more than $56 billion in debt and access to new funds. He also opened talks with the United States and succeeded in getting Sudan removed from its list of states that sponsor terrorism. In October 2020, he oversaw the signing of a peace deal to end unrest in Darfur, Kordofan and Blue Nile regions. But his economic blueprint ran into trouble when he scrapped fuel subsidies and the devaluation and floating of the currency. The reforms were unpopular and anti-government protests broke out. His troubles escalated in mid-September this year after protesters blockaded Sudan's main seaport, triggering nationwide food and fuel shortages. Divisions within the umbrella civilian alliance in the Sovereign Council also deepened. And in October, Hamdok was placed under house arrest following a military coup. CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, for more insight into the political dynamics in Sudan, we spoke to Matthew Benson a little earlier. He is a research associate in the Peace and Conflict Resolution Evidence Platform at the London School of Economics. Here's what he had to say.
Hamdok was given an impossible job. He had to overcome decades of military control over the main revenue sources in the country, and he had to dismantle a security apparatus which does not see itself in any way being able to be beholden to the public and sees itself as enriched. There's a need for a large-scale bargain between people and government in the state, which Hamdok was. He's a technocrat. He's a wonderfully skilled technocrat and has huge support in the international community and with other academics and these kind of things. But it wasn't clear that he was necessarily a skilled politician. And the skilled politics are really desperately going to be needed in order to forge what is going to be a very fraught, politically contentious transition. Now's the time to really think through how to ensure the transition process actually takes place. So it's really a time to think through how is it that you can actually incentivize military and security forces that are backed by the military, incentivize them to no longer play by rules which are their own, to actually be beholden to formal rules and look at and actually challenge them to sort of look at alternatives that aren't just playing off the books and sort of enriching themselves rather than actually playing for the benefit of Sudanese people, but really looking at pragmatic measures that can be done incrementally to bring people to the table and actually not necessarily look for justice immediately, but certainly to look for ways that you can actually forge a political bargain and a political consensus that prevents conflict and actually listens to the will of the people and forges a democratic Sudan, which this is a rare moment in Sudan's history where there's a real push that this is a window that needs to be seized to ensure that there is actually a democratic Sudan that actually works for the majority of the people. My biggest fear at the moment is really that Sudan's protesters, which need to remain peaceful, because the moment that actually things shift towards any type of protesters mobilizing against or development on security forces against the military and any sort of security force that is backed by the military, increases the risk of civil war, increases the risk of conflict, armed conflict between protesters and between the security forces. So really at a moment where this continued and the protesters have been extraordinarily well organized. They've learned from the lessons of previous attempts from the Arab Spring and so forth, and really look towards other countries such as Libya and sort of think, well, we don't want to do that. So how is it that we can do something genuinely different and transform this country in a way that everyone has been hoping for decades? So I think at the moment we cannot give up hope on the protesters, and the international community really needs to work better at linking with a variety of scholars and activists, and also some technocrats and so forth, to really think through how is it that you can forge links between protester demands and between and prevent this conflict from getting any worse and actually spiraling into something that does lead to the increased fragmentation of the state.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's coming up on Africa Live. Health authorities believe South Africa's COVID infections have passed the peak of the fourth wave. And we explore a rare adventure on the African continent that's drawing tourists to Lesotho.
Hey there, my name is Asta Tao, and there are 3 things you should know about me. I love food, I'm obsessed with history, and I travel whenever I can. So join me as I explore cultures through food, meet innovative chefs, and celebrate Africa's diversity.
South African health authorities believe the country has passed the peak of the fourth wave of COVID infections. The government has already lifted certain restrictions to allow the public an opportunity to rebuild after one of the strictest lockdowns on the continent. CGTN's CS du Plessis has more from Johannesburg.
The mood amongst the people of the Republic of South Africa is upbeat following the government's latest decision to ease some of the restrictions. The scrapping of the midnight curfew and the controversial alcohol sales ban has seen spirits lifted of the citizens of the Rainbow Nation, as the focus shifts onto a new year after a rather demanding 12 months. The general feeling is of a renewed positivity, despite the country remaining on alert level 1 of lockdown. Cases have dropped drastically, with the latest figures indicating that South Africa has indeed passed the peak of the Omicron-fueled fourth wave. As of midnight, 4,379 new cases were reported, while 30 people succumbed to the coronavirus, taking the death toll to 91,228. Government continues to urge the public to adhere to strict measures of social distancing, hand washing and the wearing of masks, while researchers believe the reason why the peak has passed is due to 3 factors: South Africa's relatively young population, the country is in the middle of the southern hemisphere summer where respiratory diseases are uncommon, and due to the country having some sort of herd immunity from the previous variants, making their immune systems less susceptible to contracting symptoms requiring hospitalization. It must be pointed out, though, that there is a steady increase in people being admitted to hospital, but it is mainly those who are unvaccinated, and hospitals are not at capacity. Government has also announced that health workers have until the 14th of January to get their Johnson & Johnson booster shot after phase 2 of the Sesonke trial started in November last year. According to health authorities, having the booster shot 6 months after the first jab considerably is good protection against what is now the dominant variant in South Africa. CS du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, 4,000 passengers and crew have evacuated a German cruise ship in the Portuguese capital, fleeing a COVID-19 outbreak. 64 people tested positive on board, and port authorities in Lisbon say another 12 cases were detected on land. Passengers were taken by bus to Lisbon's airport. Yemen's Houthi forces have seized an Emirati-flagged vessel in the Red Sea. Houthi authorities say the cargo ship was carrying military equipment and was carrying out what they described as hostile acts. The Saudi-UAE coalition that has been fighting a war in Yemen since 2015 claims the vessel was only carrying medical supplies. The Houthis have controlled the capital and governed 2/3 of the population in Yemen for more than 6 years now. Iran has marked the second anniversary of the U.S. murder of its top general, Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was killed together with the deputy of Iraq's security forces, Abu Mahdi al-Mahundis, in a U.S. drone strike near the Baghdad airport. The assassination pushed Iran and the U.S. close to an all-out conflict. It's also sparked outrage in Iraq, leading its parliament to order all foreign troops to leave the country. Ehsan Kevani has more on commemorations held in the Iranian capital.
Since Thursday, numerous ceremonies have been held in different parts of Iran, but the main ceremony is now being held in Tehran's Grand Musalla, where President Raisi is giving a speech. General Soleimani was a very popular figure in Iran and even beyond the borders, and today people, especially the youth, commemorate his devotion by gathering in Tehran's Grand Musalla. Another commemoration ceremony is being held in the city of Kerman in southeast of Iran, where General Soleimani was buried after an assassination 2 years ago. 2 years ago, and after the assassination, Iran's envoy at the UN sent a letter to the UN Secretary General and also the Security Council and called for a resolution to condemn the move and also asked for persecution of the then U.S. President Donald Trump. The UN rapporteur for extrajudicial killing, in fact, concluded in July 2020 in a report that General Soleimani's assassination was unlawful and violated the UN Charter. But so far, no resolutions have been issued. Now Iran urges the UN General Assembly to take all the legal initiatives within its power, including the adoption of a resolution to condemn the assassination of government and diplomatic officials.
The Ethiopian government has commissioned a state-of-the-art library in the capital, Addis Ababa. The library is said to be one of the biggest in the region. At the inauguration, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said such facilities will help Ethiopia overcome illiteracy. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Here it is, the first modern and strategically built library of Ethiopia, and it's officially commissioned by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Addis Ababa's Mayor Adanech Habebe. Dubbed Abrot or Enlightenment, is expected to serve hundreds of thousands of students, researchers, and any other person from now on. At the inaugural event, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said this library marks Ethiopia as a nation and will serve to defeat illiteracy with enlightenment.
Because of illiteracy, we have been fighting one another. We have destroyed our country. Illiteracy has made us sell out and attack our nation by becoming messengers of our enemies. All of this will be solved, especially when our children are enlightened. When enlightenment comes, the generation will understand the true meaning of a nation, freedom, history, and they will understand the benefits of prosperity and the journey to it. This library, therefore, will serve as a deliverer of knowledge to the people.
The library is built in a whopping 19,000 meter squares of land. It has cost 1.15 billion birr, that is about 25 million US dollars. The construction was completed in just 18 months with close supervision of the Addis Ababa city administration.
This library is built based on any global standard. It has a beautiful architectural design. It has also become one of the top 10 libraries in the continent. The shelves of this library are more than 1.5 kilometers. 8 book-selling shops are also part of this library.
This Enlightenment Library is part of the mega Addis Ababa City Beautification and Infrastructure Projects, also known as the Sugar Project. Already, the city has got a new park, square, and all-inclusive entertainment village located in the Entoto Mountains. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the best is yet to come for Addis Ababa.
This library is one of the most meaningful buildings we have put together right after the reform. But the much better one will be the Science Museum. Especially when it comes to size and quality, the Science Museum, now under construction, will be much, much better.
Ethiopia's newest and biggest library has 100,000 books in it, with also more than thousands of contents suited for the blind and visually impaired. The 4-story Enlightenment can accommodate 2,000 people all at once. Ethiopia now is engaged in the work of post-conflict construction and already counting the costs and fixing the basic infrastructure of the nation in the war-affected areas seems to be completed. To claim victory, however, in this area, the country needs time and billions of dollars of investment. Grumjala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And to Egypt now, where the Interior Ministry has been undertaking reforms in its prison system. There is now a deliberate shift towards having rehabilitation centers in place of prisons. Wanja Mungai reports.
This facility is one of the newest projects under the Interior Ministry's prison reforms in Egypt. It is located in Badia, some 55 kilometers northeast of the capital, Cairo. Authorities at the ministry are seeking to transfer inmates here from 3 public prisons.
3 general prisons will also be shut down amid the inauguration of Badi's Correctional and Rehabilitation Center.
Officials say the center will only accommodate inmates serving short sentences. They are hoping to change the old mindset that prisoners should only face punishment with no chance to reform. Instead, efforts will be put to prepare them for life after jail.
We are talking about changing the ideas relating to the punishment establishment in Egypt, turning it from a prison to a correctional and rehabilitation center, from a prisoner to a resident, from the negative image of someone who committed a crime to a citizen that is being prepared and rehabilitated in these centers.
A medical center, mosque, church, courthouse, and a nursery for mothers is part of the package here.
The ministry's efforts have kicked off throughout various legislative and executive levels in order to reform the concept of prisons, turning them into correctional and rehabilitation centers, a model that reflects the extent of progress and modernizations.
The Badia Rehabilitation Center is one of the many such facilities that the government has opened in efforts to change the country's approach towards the conditions of inmates. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
To Tunisia now, where tens of thousands of craftswomen are trying to regroup after their businesses were hit hard by the pandemic. By preserving traditional skill sets, these women hope to improve their socio-economic situation. Adnan Shwashi reports.
Zina and dozens of pottery artisans work and live in this popular neighborhood in the suburbs of the capital city, Tunis. Despite the negative repercussions of the health crisis on this business, the craftswoman is not willing to leave her job.
As craftswomen, we've always made a living from selling different items which are necessary in any house in Tunisia. The pandemic has affected this business model and it's hard to resume normal activity. Our usual and passing customers, as well as foreign tourists, have deserted the area. We cannot earn a decent living if we haven't been selling our craft items for 18 months.
Several initiatives have been launched in Tunisia to promote women artisans, including online retail. Daula Smail believes that these projects are made for the new generation of artisans who are familiar with the internet and the new technologies.
I started working here at 18 in 1974. I have learned this skill from my ancestors.
It's the same technique. Nothing has changed for hundreds of years. We only use clay, water and fire as well as traditional items. We don't use technology to market and sell our handmade pottery. This is for young artisans. This skill will disappear if young people don't learn it and take over.
The Minister of Social Affairs declared that the government will provide financial and technical assistance to Tunisian female pottery artisans to help them sustain business during this difficult time.
These craftswomen who are preserving heritage crafts need and deserve state support. They were ignored by former governments. We will work with other departments to improve their working conditions as well as their social and economic situation.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, artisans struggled financially as tourism to Tunisia plummeted and many national trade fairs were called off. Experts have said that the Tourism and Handicrafts Department needs to invest in digital platforms and to provide digital marketing support, enabling pottery makers to expand their market reach. On August 13, 2021, Tunisia celebrated the National Women's Day. The head of state visited the few remaining pottery artisans in the Grand Tunis district. Qais Said pledged to defend the socio-economic rights of craftswomen and to improve their working conditions. Adnan Shaweshi, CGTN, Tunis.
In southern Africa, the mountainous kingdom of Lesotho is looking to cash in on tourists who are seeking a more adventurous skiing destination than the well-worn slopes of Europe's Alps. Let's take a look.
Suggest a holiday in Africa and most people picture safaris or beaches. Few think of skiing. Yet the continent contains 5 mountain ranges with enough seasonal snow to make slopes. Tucked into South Africa's stunning Drakensberg Range is a skiing resort in the mountain kingdom of Lesotho.
Talk about skiing and snow, people don't relate to Africa. I mean, it's like you say, people think of the Alps and the Rockies in Canada and, you know, like bigger mountains. But I mean, this area of Lesotho is actually got quite a unique climate, and also because of the altitude. I mean, we're sitting at 3,000 meters where we're standing now. Top of the mountain is just 3,222.
It's a good day for Hope Ramokhocho. He is a skiing and snowboarding instructor here, and he loves slicing and gliding his way down a snow-covered slope.
Africa is, you know, you wouldn't actually even think of it. I think that's what actually amazes most people, because they're like, okay, let's see what we have. Yes, it isn't much, but people come in and have a whole lot of fun.
When he isn't enjoying himself on the snow, he's teaching visitors how to ski.
I think transferring of knowledge is all that actually keeps me going. I love giving new knowledge to people, and I also love progression. Seeing it happen actually makes me very happy.
As with other tourist spots, the COVID-19 pandemic and travel restrictions have drastically slashed visitor numbers. For those who are still able to make their way to Afri-Ski, Ramokhocho will be waiting to teach them.
It is my first time here. It was something very different. My knees and feet are paining. I broke a sweat, you know, unexpectedly, but it was mad fun. Yeah.
I haven't skied before, but it's been challenging and fun at the same time, because I haven't done something this spontaneous, you know. I've always been, so I just decided to try skiing for the first time, and I loved it.
As the new year begins with eased COVID-19 travel restrictions, Lesotho hopes this will boost tourism again. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
And let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Kenya's economy grows nearly 10% in the third quarter following the easing of COVID-19 restrictions. And South Africa's president set to receive the first part of a much-anticipated report into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Kenya, where the economy rebounded in the third quarter of this year, or rather 2021, following the easing of COVID-19 containment measures. Now, according to Kenya's National Bureau of Statistics, East Africa's biggest economy grew by 9.9% year-on-year during the quarter. During a similar period in 2020, the economy contracted by 2.1% at a time when the economy was still reeling from the effects of COVID-19. Now, manufacturing, transportation and financial activities grew by 9.5%, 13% and 6.7% respectively. That's while the electricity and water supply sector recorded an accelerated growth of 4.5%. The agricultural sector, which is a backbone of Kenya's economy, contracted by 1.8% in the third quarter, and that's due to drought conditions witnessed in most parts of the country. And heading to South Africa now, where the first part of a much-anticipated report into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud will be published this week. Over the past few years, the state capture inquiry has heard testimony from hundreds of witnesses who spoke out about alleged corruption in government and in state-owned enterprises during former President Jacob Zuma's reign. Now, according to the government, the state will not be able to determine how those implicated in corruption will be handled until the report had been scrutinized. The Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture says that it will submit its report in 3 parts. The second part is expected at the end of next month and the last part at the end of February. Now, since the start of the coronavirus, a slew of cyber attacks have dominated the headlines. Amid a rising demand for online services in Africa, the continent has become particularly vulnerable to the crime wave. Well, from Johannesburg, here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola exploring how rising cyber threats are set to not just hamper Africa's economic recovery from COVID-19, but also cause long-lasting damage.
A continent-wide cybersecurity concern is the increasing number of ransomware or cyber extortion attacks.
Only 30% of the public services organization that participated said they are prepared for this threat. And I guess the key takeaway, what I found, is that 5% of the participants that we surveyed said they would pay out in case they were attacked. 4% said they did pay out.
Cyber attacks come in many forms, and businesses and countries react and cope differently. But when it comes to advanced persistent threat attacks, they are generally state-sponsored and go largely undetected, sometimes for years. Everyone is equally exposed.
I would say that no one is prepared for advanced persistent threat attacks, no one, because they would use our zero-day exploits and there wouldn't be a 100% protection for such kind of threats. But on average, South Africa does good compared to some regions on the world regarding cyber criminal mass-scale attacks.
Looking ahead to 2022, and IT security managers are worried about the actions of the US authorities as they go after the ransomware gangs, driving them to other continents.
We will see more attacks, particularly against critical infrastructure. And something that has been forecasted on a global scale is that the ransom demands will become higher. These guys have money to spend. They will buy what's called zero-day vulnerabilities to make their attacks more efficient. And it's just a much bigger threat than it's already been this year.
Ganeva says that advanced persistent threat attacks are an increasing reality on the continent.
APT actors that were not present here before would enter the region for their particular reasons, driven by the relations between different countries, the economic situation, the investments in the African continent. And we probably will face more APT actors present in the African continent.
Cybersecurity and cyber threats are increasing on the African continent as the continent opens up to include more businesses. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's go to Egypt now, where Italy's multinational oil and gas company, Eni, has won a concession to invest $1 billion in oil excavations and $20 million in digging 4 oil wells in the country's Gulf of Suez and the Nile Delta. Yes, CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details from Cairo.
The oil exploration agreement with Eni is another important step in the Egyptian government's policy to fully utilize its oil and gas reserves.
It's part of the government's new strategy to face the problem that oil wells produce a lot at the beginning and then begin to empty out. The government regularly makes seismic tests to study the probability of oil and gas reserves in certain locations and then announces bids for concessions to drill for new wells and extract more oil and gas to make up for the dwindling reserves in the old wells.
The winning bid of the promising oil fields in the Gulf of Suez and Nile Delta is Italian oil giant Eni, which has a strong history in Egypt. It has discovered the country's largest natural gas reserves at the Zohr field in the eastern Mediterranean in 2013. Since then, the North African country has become self-sufficient in natural gas and is currently an exporter as well. Cairo has been providing a raft of incentives to encourage international firms to invest in this sector, a vital component for the Egyptian economy.
In 2021, up to 27% of state budget is from petroleum production. It is a very important source of income that the government should preserve and increase because it's sustainable and energy is always in high demand in international markets. Secondly, the government is also investing in upgrading the current wells to ensure more production from the same wells, and this creates more income, employs more workers, and supports the economy.
Going into 2022, the Egyptian government has announced a number of deals are to be inked soon with other oil giants like China's Sinopec and US Apache to maintain a constant supply of the precious oil and gas mineral from the North African country. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's get you some international news now. In Germany, 3 nuclear power plants are being taken off the electricity grid. The shutdowns are in line with the country's plans to end atomic power, which is a decision made a decade ago following a reactor meltdown in Japan. From Berlin, CGTN's Trent Murray reports.
Well, it was back in 2011 that former Chancellor Angela Merkel first promised to phase out nuclear power. Her pledge had come within weeks of Japan's Fukushima nuclear disaster, an event which not only shocked many people here in Germany, but also created political pressure for Merkel. Herself, a trained quantum chemist, could now see that many in Germany were worried about the perceived risks associated with the nuclear industry. That makes the shutdown of these 3 nuclear reactors a significant moment. Merkel's original promise was for Germany to phase out nuclear power by 2022. And with the closure of the 3 plants in Schleswig-Holstein, Lower Saxony and Bavaria, that keeps that timeline on track. It leaves Europe's biggest economy with just 3 reactors remaining, but they too are now on borrowed time, with the Environment Ministry pledging to power them all down by the end of 2022 at the latest. Now, nuclear accounts for about 10% of Germany's electricity production, and the shutdown has prompted some uncomfortable questions about how the void will be filled. But the new government, led by Chancellor Olaf Scholz, has set a goal of generating about 80% of the country's electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar by the year 2030. Energy policy is always highly political in Germany, not just because of how important tackling climate change is to vast swathes of the population, but also because in many ways it underpins the country's complicated relationship with Russia. About 40% of Germany's natural gas imports come from Russia, and with gas prices rising right as winter sets in, President Vladimir Putin has promised to come to the rescue, saying the Kremlin-backed Nord Stream 2 pipeline has now been filled with gas and is ready to go, pending the final regulatory approvals from authorities here in Berlin. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
Well, let's shift focus now. The highly contagious Omicron variant continues to spread around the world. In Europe, Bulgaria has detected its first 12 cases. The country has now offered a one-off cash bonus of about $44 to pensioners who opt to get vaccinated or get a booster shot. Well, Bulgaria is the EU's least vaccinated member state. Omicron has also caused travel disruptions globally, with over 4,000 flights cancelled on Sunday. The U.S. alone experienced more than 2,000 cancellations. The country's defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, has tested positive with mild symptoms. Austin last met President Joe Biden on December 21st, more than a week before he started experiencing symptoms. Now, the U.S. has been seen unprecedented case numbers as it continues to grapple with the Omicron variant. Mandy Geither reports.
A new year, continued concern, record numbers of COVID-19 cases in the U.S.
Omicron is truly everywhere,
disrupting a normalcy Americans were hoping to see in 2022.
What I am so worried about over the next month or so is that our economy is going to shut down, not because of policies from the federal government or from the state governments, but rather because so many of us are ill.
U.S. airlines already affected. Sick crews, winter storms have led to more than 2,300 more flights being canceled today, bringing the total to more than 13,000 cancellations since Christmas Eve.
We should anticipate huge delays and disruptions in that, all transportation hubs.
Healthcare services exhausted after several surges of the virus, stretched thin again by a growing number of COVID-19 patients, some states calling in the National Guard for help.
We're managing, but we're getting sick. And it's a staffing issue for our hospitals right now, particularly our emergency departments.
As students Aya returned to school, unprecedented numbers of children with COVID being admitted to the hospital. Healthcare experts say the vast majority unvaccinated.
Whether adults or children, we're not seeing the same level of severity. But if you're unvaccinated, that's the group still at highest risk.
I'm Mandy Gaither reporting.
Well, let's go to Sudan now, where more protests are planned on a Tuesday. And in anticipation of these, the Technical Committee of the Security Council says that bridges around Khartoum will be closed, except for Halfaya and Setra bridges. Here now are more reactions following the move by Abdallah Hamdok to resign as Prime Minister.
Hamdok's resignation came late, but it was necessary. That's because Hamdok was one of the players with international access. Now we can get out of the access conflict, because Sudan needs an independent national figure who can preserve Sudan's sovereignty from external interference, whether it is the intervention of the Axis or the countries of the region.
The time is not appropriate, and we need him at a time like this. His resignation could open the doors to many problems in Sudan. We could lose martyrs, and military could expand in power.
Although his resignation came late, but we needed it. So even though he put his hand with them, we cannot deny his grace, because we love him very much. But he is wrong, and may God forgive him. And thank you, Hamdok.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll be analyzing the decision by the United States to remove Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea from the duty-free trade program after alleged rights violations and recent coups. We will explore this and much more at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, do stay with us here on Africa Live. Your sports news up next. Coming up, armoured vehicles patrol the streets of Limbe as the Cameroonian city prepares to host AFCON matches.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Sports news now, and we start in Cameroon, where the Africa Cup of Nations is scheduled to start less than a week from now. But concern is growing in the country's conflict-torn southwest region, where militant separatists have vowed to disrupt the tournament. Droves of armoured vehicles are now patrolling the streets of Limbe ahead of Sunday's kickoff. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson with more.
Cameroon is hosting the 2021 AFCON in 6 cities, but security is potentially most at threat in Limbe, a city on the tropical Atlantic coast whose surrounding region has been rocked by armed attacks since war broke out in 2017. The conflict, in which armed groups are trying to form a breakaway state called Ambazonia, has killed at least 3,000 people and forced nearly 1 million to flee. Violence has worsened this year as separatists increase their use of improvised explosives.
My fear and the fear of many Limbe denizens is that the recent phenomenon of bomb blasts, which has been happening in other parts of Fako division, like in Boya, can be a common phenomenon during this AFCON period.
Insecurity is just one issue facing the tournament. Concerns about the readiness of stadiums and the spread of the Omicron COVID-19 variant have also made headlines in recent weeks. Limbe's Omnisport Stadium will host matches from Group F, comprising Tunisia, Mali, Mauritania and Gambia. The group's first game will be between Tunisia and Mali on the 12th of January. Authorities have kept security plans under wraps, but promise there will be no disruption to Group F matches.
It is in the same context that we managed the CHAN a few months ago. So I can't reveal here the measures that are being put in place, but you should know that just as the CHAN took place under very good conditions, AFCON will also take place under very good conditions. There are no worries. There's nothing to worry about.
Armed police, gendarmes and soldiers are already positioned at major intersections. Checkpoints have been set up on roads into the city. But despite the fears, some in Limbe are prepared to welcome hopefully many fans in the city.
With such an event, we do believe it will boom our business because so many customers will come from different areas, different towns, different countries. We meet so many other people that will meet new friends, make new friends. I'm very happy for the event.
24 nations will be taking part in the 33rd edition of the AFCON that was postponed by a year due to the global pandemic. Algeria will be defending the title they won at the Egypt 2019 finals. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And to the English Premier League now. Chelsea manager Thomas Tuchel was due to hold talks with unsettled Belgian striker and record